We're live.
Welcome everybody to House Energy and Digital Infrastructure. It is Tuesday, March 10th, Policy Crossover Week. My name's Kathleen James and I'm from Manchester.
Scott Campbell from St. Johnsbury.
Richard Bailey, Memorial 2.
Chris Morrow, Wyndham, Windsor, Bennington. Michael Southwood, Caledonia.
Christopher Howland, Rutland 4.
Sarah Torrey, Washington 2.
Graham Putner, Chittenden 13, Burlington.
Laura Scalia,
Great, and in the room.
Dana Lee Perry, Grassing Group.
Dylan Swicki with Lena.
Maria Royal with Legislative Council. Ellen Tchaikovsky, Legislative Council.
Great. Let's leave the door open. All right, just a quick, we've got a walkthrough of H727, our data center bill, but just quickly before we do that, I wanted to give a little preview of this week. We have 5 bills that we are going to discuss and try to get voted out by Friday. Friday's our deadline. And I would anticipate that our schedule might be changing a little bit just as we have committee discussions, as we hear back from people. But the 5 bills are our conversation around the Joint Carbon Emissions Reduction Committee. We're going to talk about that this afternoon. We're not voting it out. There's no bill yet. Ellen has the changes that we talked about to the statute. I just sent those to her earlier today. And then we were going to talk about a possible session law addition. So that bill's kind of on the way. H753, we have an updated draft that should be in everybody's inboxes and or posted and or both. And then some one additional piece of testimony and request from Vermont Gas that should be in everybody's inbox and posted. The committee bill, our miscellaneous PUC bill, we're going to be talking about tomorrow morning. Data center bill we're talking about right now. And the residential building energy bill is...
There's a new draft of that.
There's a new draft
which
of
I'm
that.
sending to Alex right now.
Great, and you can send to the committee.
Send to everybody or?
Sure. Yeah. All right. So that's the preview. But for now, Bailey. Oh my God! I thought you were
No.
gesturing at me.
No, I was.
Sorry, movement out of the corner of my eye. All right. So anyway, it's going to be could be kind of a stop and go week. Because I want to allow plenty of time for committee discussion, plenty of time for committee votes. Actually, I want to allow some time for our committee members to prepare floor reports if they need some time. And I don't feel like we need to dive into all of our post-crossover stuff this week. So if we're gappy, it's because I'm trying to give us all time to do our work and get our floor reports ready and be buttoned up. And then next week after crossover, we'll start round 2. So, all righty. So Rep. Sabili, I know you worked a lot on this bill over break and appreciate all that work. And do you want to give everybody an overview or should we just start the walkthrough?
Yeah, thanks, Madam Chair. We have Ledge Council here, so that will be helpful. I just wanted to say we've incorporated a number of changes. Thank you to Representative Southworth and Representative Kleffner for their comments, kind of very specific comments about water. Hopefully we've gotten those buttoned down in this. There's been a lot of stakeholder engagement, and I think it is fair to say that we may hear from a number of witnesses who will be coming in to testify that they appreciate the work so far and are reserving the right to continue to make changes in the Senate. I will say personally, I think that's appropriate given how big this policy area is, how new this policy area is. And we certainly will have to decide like what the Senate does with this. I continue to think this is really important for us to move forward. So we've done a lot of work and discussion with the administration, with energy stakeholders and environmental organizations, as well as Ledge Council and Maria in particular. Thank you so much for all the revisions that you've done here. So we're doing our best in an area that is rapidly evolving and changing. And so I feel like we've got a decent frame to move forward.
Thanks, Rep. Sibilia. So what I heard you saying and what I'm taking into this walkthrough is that, and I saw the extent of the stakeholder engagement over town meeting break. It was awesome. What I'm hearing you saying is that probably not everybody is getting every single thing they want, or probably not everybody is completely 100% like this is done, but you feel like this is a draft worthy of our consideration for a vote, so we can get it over to the Senate. Because who knows what's going to happen over there?
Yes.
Okay. All right, Maria.
Do you want the door open still? Is it hot? Is that right?
It's so
Okay.
hot.
Yeah.
Yeah, unless it gets distracting.
May I say one more thing?
Yeah.
So this is an unusual in terms of just the scale of the subject matter that is being in the statute area that is being considered in here. So we've had 3 different attorneys looking at this, which is unusual.
Yeah.
And especially during crossover as this thing is starting to scale up. So again, want to thank all of the Ledge Council. Michael Grady has also done a lot of work on this for a lot of support.
Yeah.
So I'm only seeing the as introduced on the H727 page.
Might not be posted.
It's posted. I just posted like 10 minutes ago. Anybody want to be posted?
Okay.
Yes, but it should be on there.
There we go.
Draft 1.2.
Posted on today.
Yep. Oh, and House Environment is not taking possession of the bill, but they are doing a walkthrough and flyby tomorrow morning.
Today, Michael O'Grady is in there to go over the water provisions, and then tomorrow I'm going to be in there and maybe Ellen, if she's available, and review the rest of this.
Okay.
Yeah.
I have it.
Okay, so Maria Royal with Legislative Council. And so just a few kind of introductory clarifying remarks. The changes that you'll see in this draft that are highlighted in yellow are changes to the bill as introduced. Because I know you saw some other proposals, some other draft language, but this is just to the language as introduced. And then also really big picture, before we start going through, I thought it might be helpful to kind of tell you what is in here and what isn't in here. And then it'll become, I think, a little bit clearer as we go through specifics. So in the bill as introduced, you had the PUC coming up with a general tariff that would be applicable to all data centers, kind of terms and conditions generally applicable to data centers in the state. And then each data center would enter into a specific contract with the utility and electric company. And there were required contractual provisions that needed to be included in the contract. There was also a section that required a data center to get a CPG, kind of a siting piece of it, which was modeled after 248, 248A, those CPG requirements. That has been taken out, that CPG requirement. There's language in here that makes data centers subject to Act 250. And then in terms of the tariff contract issues, basically they've been merged into one requirement. So there's no longer a general tariff that the PUC developed. Instead, it's the contract with the utility and very specific criteria that need to be met, subject to the PUC's review and approval, and then specific findings that the PUC must make. So anyway, that's big picture. I just wanted you to kind of have that in the forefront of your mind as we start to go through it. So that being said, so it's a proposed strike all amendment. A couple of changes. So as Representative Sebelius mentioned, some of these changes reflect what you heard proposed from the Department of Public Service. For example, the very first change on line 16, just changing the word essential to emerging. So ensures a regulatory framework that ensures responsible growth of an emerging industry in a manner that protects existing electric ratepayers from unwarranted costs and promotes sustainable climate, environmental, community, and equity outcomes consistent with state policies, plural. The definition have not changed. So a data center is a facility that has capacity to use 20 megawatts or more of power. And then the facility is all of the infrastructure, equipment structures associated with the data center. So that brings us to line 9, section 284. So this is a new subchapter in title 30, and specifically in chapter 5. Just to orient you a little bit more. So as I mentioned, there's no longer general tariff requirement. There's just a specific requirement that a data center enter into what's called a large load service equity contract. This is similar to the language that was proposed by the department. So we'll just read through that first subsection A so you get a sense.
I'm sorry, I hate to interrupt you. I need to understand a little bit better what the general tariff would have been. Can you just remind me of so tariffs out and instead we do these large, could you just back me up there?
Well, sure. So the terminology actually was a little bit confusing for me, so I appreciate the question. But before getting into it, so the general tariff, that would have been something that the PUC developed that applied to all data centers, minimum kind of requirements. This is how you have to operate. These are the terms and conditions of operating in Vermont. Every data center applies to every data center, right? So that was just a requirement in your original draft that the PUC had to come up with those generally applicable terms applying to all data centers. That requirement has been removed. And instead, there's just the contract between a data center and a distribution utility and very specific provisions that need to be in that contract, and then specific findings that the PUC needs to make before approving a contract, right? So individual contracts or tariffs, it's just another form of tariff. The special contract, another form of tariff unique to each distribution utility.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yes. So instead of the PUC at the 10,000 foot level saying we're going to develop this set of the general tariff that would apply to any data center that tries to come, here are the guidelines, that's out.
Yeah.
And now we're saying instead, if any specific single data center wants to come and or every data center that wants to come, each one will have to have its own contract with utility, and that contract will have to be worked out according to the bullets that we put in.
Yep. Yeah. And approved.
And approved.
By
And the
PUC.
PUC has to approve it. Okay, that is now very clear to me. Yeah.
And they wouldn't be able to do what what's the new IBM Global Foundries is doing with doing their own utility.
This doesn't specifically account for that now.
It doesn't say one way or the other.
It doesn't address that at all. And so if you wanted to make room for allowing that, you could add language that's a little clearer, because I'm not sure
Isn't
that
that
this
called
language.
like a large load? Well, anyway.
Self-managed utility.
That's
Yeah. And the reason why I'm saying it's not necessarily permissible under this is because you'll see, in that very first subsection A, line 17 through 19, the data center shall be served by an electric company
Right.
pursuant to.
That's good.
So that's why I would want to open up that line, notwithstanding this, if you wanted to include something like that, the data center could be approved for
Oh,
That's,
I
yeah.
was just wanted to get clarity in language. I don't have a
Okay.
strong opinion
Okay.
about it.
Okay.
And I've got one more, sorry. And again, back to your high level stuff. So, in addition, what's out is that, a data center would have had to go through the 248 process with the PUC and get a certificate of public good. That's out because instead they're going to have Act 250 review and they will have to have this contract.
Correct.
Okay. For comments?
Except any improvements that the utility has to make this, to service this load. Those improvements would go through the 248 process.
If they separately trigger 248,
Right.
there's nothing that would,
Right.
right, correct. So all the laws and regulations still apply. If there are any other triggers for any other review, nothing's being waived. And I'll also just mention, there are some findings that you can probably eliminate now because they're covered under Act 250. So just kind of holdover language that can probably be stricken, but we'll address that or those provisions when we get there. So again, this contract must be approved by the commission, and then the large load service equity contract shall. And we'll go through each of these. Some of this is just combining subsection or subdivisions, but there is some additional language. So I'll read the first one. Include a method for allocating costs that is equal or proportional to the costs of providing electric service to the data center, including providing for equitable contributions to the embedded costs and the efficiency, reliability, and resiliency of the electricity network. That, in particular, that embedded costs language was proposed by the department. And I believe what it's getting at is not just the cost of any new infrastructure, but any, to the extent the data center relies on existing infrastructure, that they pay their fair share for the use and upgrade and maintenance of the existing infrastructure.
So does electricity network include distribution and transmission?
Yeah. So to mitigate the risk of other ratepayer classes paying unwarranted costs, including any electric generation, distribution, and transmission infrastructure costs incurred to meet the load requirements of a data center, or the energy capacity, transmission, or resource adequacy costs incurred as a result of the data center's load. And again, this reflects language that the department proposed, not just looking at the specific infrastructure costs, but also kind of the regional needs in terms of adequacy of the existing grid and capacity of the existing grid. So then you'll see some provisions are stricken here, and actually I'm going to need to renumber this, so it hasn't been edited yet. So no longer including or not mentioning the renewable energy targets. All of those currently exist in law. There's no change there. Mandatory contractual provisions, that's no longer relevant. And then the general, any other conditions the commission required, that's just stricken. And so what's being stricken is, so what had preceded this were the general tariff requirements, and then what came next were the specific contractual requirements. But as I mentioned, they're merged. So subsection C, that language on page 4, lines 1 and 2 is stricken because we are talking about the contract provisions. So specify the duration of the contract, no longer specify or requiring that the contract be not less than 10 years, but instead saying that specify the duration of the contract and the date or the estimated date that the electric company will begin to provide electric service to the data center. Then obligate the data center to pay a minimum amount or percentage based on the data center's projected electricity use for the duration of the contract to ensure compliance with subdivision B1. That's the allocation of costs, the data center being responsible for its proportion of any incremental costs, new costs. Include a collateral requirement sufficient to mitigate the risk of stranded costs. Yep.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, Rep Southworth.
So I think I asked this before, but I want to make sure that that one's number 7, the collateral requirement will cover decommissioning. Or is there that?
Well, it's sort of getting to that,
Okay.
but there is another
Okay.
section on
Yep.
decommit that was put back in
Perfect.
response to, I think, the questions that you raised.
And I have a question back on page 2.
Okay.
We are able to. So that all the stricken language there, 3, 4, 5. And so on, that was tariff related.
Yeah. With the exception of the renewable energy standard, which you're just not including in here, but those standards would still apply to utilities. The rest of the language is, reflects the mandatory contractual provision.
Right.
This is the contract, so.
Okay. So-
Yeah,
And I remember we did talk about this. It's the utility that is compliant with the res. So, and they're entering a contract with the utility.
right, okay, definitely. So I'm now on 6, which is gonna be 5 in the next draft. Line 10 on page 4, include a reasonable charge for demand in excess of the data center's projected electricity demand at the time the contract is entered into. So to the extent it goes beyond what it anticipates using, that there should be some charge for that usage. The collateral requirement to mitigate the risk of stranded costs. Then new language, and this is very, yep,
I'm sorry.
no,
I'm
no,
going to keep interrupting you. But,
that's fine.
is this appears to be kilowatt hours demand rather than a demand charge? No,
Total kilowatt. So if you made it funny, but demand, when I worked for the utility, a demand charge was rated as the peak
yes.
rate of usage over a 15-minute increment.
So my question is this refer to demand charge? Or does it refer to just the total usage?
That's a good question. It doesn't specify, so how that charge would be calculated. So you
Yeah.
might want to do that.
It seems like we should clarify that.
Okay,
Yeah.
I think that's a good idea. So then bottom of page 4, this also largely reflects the proposal by the department that the contract include provisions requiring implementation of demand side management operational measures, including harnessing load flexibility for the purpose of maintaining grid stability and efficiency.
What does that mean?
So- This could be anything from requiring like on-site generation or storage or its own flexible usage. So if there's too much demand on the system, the data center can switch to its own power or to its own storage. Sometimes referred to as load shedding. So the load on the system as a whole is not overextended. It's just a way of mitigating any risks to the reliability of the system as a whole.
Okay.
And certainly a good question if you want to, again, clarify what that means. If there are any concerns about that? That's
That might be a good idea.
okay.
Some examples.
Well, it's, yeah, either better or on-site generation of some sort, right? That's
Maybe just examples, including on-site
Gotcha.
storage
Yeah.
or load
Yeah.
shedding.
yes, right.
Yeah, okay. Okay. And then subdivision 9 include provisions for the collection of gross receipts taxes, energy efficiency charges, and any other fees or charges that may be applicable to electricity revenues. So they would be paying the energy efficiency charge and their portion of the gross receipts tax, which is the regulatory tax that utilities collect.
This is all still in conduct.
And then finally, the general on page 5, meet any other terms or conditions required by the commission, consistent with the purpose of this section and in the public interest. So the new subsection C is the section that specifies the commission shall not approve a large load service equity contract unless the commission first finds that the same will promote the general good of the state. And then subsection D,
So we took out all the language previously about the commission. And went back with the commission. Or,
sorry.
so this is the contract between the utility and the data center.
That the
The
commission has to
commission has to
approve.
approve it.
That the commission has to approve. I see. Okay, so that's 10. Oh, I see. So required. In any other terms or conditions required by the commission. So they can require extra stuff, not just approve or deny.
Has to be promoting the general good of the state. Perfect.
Okay, thank you.
And so commission approval is required. And then basically subsection C is saying the commission should not approve a contract unless it makes specific findings that it promotes the general good of the state. And then B are very specific findings that the commission needs to make. So before subsection D, before the commission approves a large load service equity contract as required under subsection C, or it should be just under this section. The commission shall find that the proposed data center, including any upgrades to electric generation, distribution, and transmission facilities necessary to power the data center, one, will not adversely affect the efficiency, reliability, and resilience of the electric power system. That what is stricken there is basically a reference to municipal and regional planning commissions, but because you have that Act 250 book now, that subdivision is supposed to be stricken. Will result in an economic benefit to the state and its residents. On the top of page 6, subdivision 3, this is one of the subdivisions that you may, most of it anyway, you may be able to delete because it's covered by Act 250. Or not. But there are a couple I'm just flagging. So however you want to address those. Yeah. That's an open question. To what extent this overlaps with or the criteria in Act 250, et cetera. I'll say definitely with the exception of what's on line 7 and 8, the attainment of the state's greenhouse gas emissions reduction requirements. So, in any event, to be determined. Subdivision 4 is consistent with the principles for resource selection expressed in the applicable electric distribution company's approved least cost integrated plan. And those plans have to be consistent with what's in subdivision 5, the electrical energy plan that's approved by the department, unless there exists good cause to permit a variance. There was a proposal to strike a reference to the Vermont Long Range Transmission Plan that Velco prepares. I think because that's incorporated in the energy plan and the least cost integrated plans of the utilities, that they take account of those the long range transmission plans. But
And I think that was the DPS.
GPS, I believe that's correct. Will not have, so some of the water and air requirements I mean, might be able to speak to these, but there may be some already covered or not, so I'm just gonna read through them. So 6 will not have an adverse effect on any segment of the waters of the state that have been designated as outstanding resource waters by the Secretary of Natural Resources.
Sorry, can you just remind me what waters have been designated as outstanding resource waters?
This is Michael Grady with legislative council. It's those that are of a higher quality and meet certain criteria of a specific nature to require designation as outstanding, and they're then managed differently than, say, Class A, Class B water. The designation of an outstanding resource water needs to be done by rule.
When you say higher quality, does that mean drinking water purposes?
It's general quality, meeting all the traditional uses of a water. It's aquatic biota, it's aquatic, habitat, aesthetics, recreation.
Oh, it's all kinds.
It's all.
Yeah, that's helpful.
Question for, Attorney Grady. So that would cover most waters in the state,
No, most,
subsurface and surface, or no?
no. Outstanding resource waters are a subclass of most of the waters in the state. They are limited in number when compared to the total university waters. They are of such high quality that they exceed most of the other waters of the state. So. Thank you.
We're calling out specifically here this kind of gold
Higher
standard
quality.
category of water, and then we get into the rest of the water language
But I mean,
later.
to an extent, because of Act 250, you might not need that language about outstanding resource waters. It's about how confident you are that Act 250 is going to cover all of your concerns about water. That's why you have that separate section. That's why you have this separate call out about protecting outstanding resources.
And roughly what proportion of the state waters would be outstanding resource waters, roughly?
I can look that up. It's I don't have that off the top of my head.
5%, 20%?
I'd say probably less than 1.
Less than 1%. Okay. That's close enough. I mean, it's not as happening size.
Okay. So top of page 7, subdivision 7. Finding can be served economically by existing or planned transmission facilities without undue adverse effect on Vermont utilities or other retail ratepayer classes. Complies with applicable air pollution control requirements under the Federal Clean Air Act.
That's a good question.
Yeah,
Why did we choose federal instead of state? Like, I know the next one we're referencing is NVSA. Is the Federal Clean Air Act cleaner than the state Clean Air Act?
I think originally it was in there because it was part of one of the 248A criteria. But I know somebody in the room who might be able to answer the question better than I can. If they would like to.
On a friend.
yeah, I had a similar question for Ellen, I assume, which is the Federal Clean Air Act
More stringent?
at risk? Well, no,
Oh,
I
yeah,
was thinking, is it more a risk?
Exactly.
So we-
That's why I asked.
So, can I ask you a
Yeah.
clarifying question? So, if we're concerned about this Federal Clean Air Act being potentially at risk, is there a reference in Vermont statute that is similar? What are the differences that we could put in instead?
We have a chapter in that. I can answer this question because in the miscellaneous environmental subjects bill, there's a provision that's intended to address when or if federal programs are amended in a way that puts state programs at risk. So it allows the public agency, not just environmental agencies, any public agency, to go to emergency rulemaking to put, say that reference to the Federal Clean Water Act was no longer relevant, that it had been repealed. But by taking that away, you make the state program kind of like a house of cards. So the A&R would be able to go to emergency rulemaking and set what the standard in narrative form would be under 42 USC 70 against Lisa 401 for 180 days. And then they could go to permanent rulemaking to make that, they'll make those substantive provisions permanent for state application.
So they're able to, they're not required to.
They're able to, but in the testimony that was provided on the emergency rulemaking provision under 623, there are programs like the Clean the Air Pollution Control Regs at A&R or the Medicaid or
So it'd create a lot of disarray, like.
yes, and there is an executive order from President Trump to direct agencies to repeal rules that were adopted in part under standards that the U.S. Supreme Court has said are no longer relevant. And if that happens, you're supposed to do it quickly, but there's been litigation about it. If that happens, a lot of state programs are at risk of. I don't even know how to characterize it. They will be subject to challenge.
Yeah, sure. Can I just, I'm sorry, where did you say that existed in a bill that's moving now?
Yes, it's in 632, which is in House Appropriations.
Yeah.
But we do have a state Clean Air Act as well. Is that correct? Or like Chapter 23 of NDSA, is that all? I mean, you have air pollution control statutes and air pollution control regulation. But like this reference, so many of them cross-reference the Federal Clean Air Act. Right? And if the Federal Clean Air Act cross-references change, then technically the provisions that you've cross-referenced may not be enforceable or administratable. And so that's why 632 has that provision. Right? It's both a bridge and a safety net. So it bridges you over the repeal, but it also saves the state program from disarray if it's based on cross references to federal.
But it's an age bill that's in approach right now. So it's somewhere on its journey.
Yeah, I thought it was going to be on the floor by the end of this week, and I was told that's not going to happen.
Again, the 632, H632 covers sort of the spectrum of.
Happens for any public agency in Vermont, not just the environment.
Mike, I actually have a question. I don't know if this would work, but would there be a way to just say complies with the Federal Clean Act as effective on such and such date, subject to
Yeah.
additional rulemaking?
Ah,
Yes.
great. What date?
You could go,
January 19th,
Hold on.
2020.
yeah, I mean, you could pick from last year. I don't know if there's been any updates this year, but you could pick from last January or
January 2025.
I do not have specific knowledge about what changes have happened since then, but you can put in here.
January 19th.
I mean, there was the ruling that the basis of the California standard was no longer relevant. And so we probably need to go back before that because for now, it's regs are basically out.
But I like to pick a date idea.
When was that? Like, done?
I think it was- I'm having off the top of my head. I think it's like in the sense, but
We'll look at that.
Okay.
See if we can think of something. So then 9 complies with harvesting procedures and procurement standards that ensure long-term forest health and sustainability, including the guidelines and standards adopted under Title 10. Is consistent with state energy efficiency requirements, including commercial building energy standards. Is consistent with environmental justice and equity policy as established under Title 3, Chapter 72. And then finally, subdivision 12 adequately accounts for potential facility decommission. And so a new subsection proposed that specifies in E, no data center shall be eligible to participate in an energy savings account or a customer credit program pursuant to subdivision 209D3C of Title 30 or self-managed energy efficiency program pursuant to the same section, different subsection.
Okay.
Yeah.
So this is language that we heard from Peter Waugh, asking for there to be both an initial consultation to make sure that we're building the most efficient building possible, which might result in a pretty significant investment from Efficiency Vermont, and then also saying now you cannot manage your own efficiency charge. I mean, if you're building.
Where was the earlier reference to the initial consultations on this building? I know we talked about it.
It's not, we haven't gotten there yet.
Oh, we haven't gotten there yet.
It's a 285.
Okay, it comes later.
Yep.
Okay.
So then subsection, the old subsection C is stricken, and this is just criteria related to a citing proceeding that's no longer applicable here.
And this was all DPS strips.
Yeah,
So that's all the 248.
yeah, right, all the 248 related stuff. Also stricken is the demand side management program, that the PUC has authority to establish. But this gets to the harnessing, power to meet demand and the load shedding the on-site. That provision is in a contract, specific contract, and that's where such issues on the demand side would be addressed. And so there's no longer a requirement for the, or a authorization for the PUC to set up a general program related to demand side management. And then section 285 is the energy efficiency design. That Representative James, I think, just mentioned early in the design development phase of a data center, the owner or operator of a data center shall consult with Efficiency Vermont to ensure compliance with state energy efficiency requirements and best practices.
And any data center would pay their efficiency charge just like
Yes.
we all do. Is that just implicit or did we say
No,
that
we said
somewhere?
that. And there was that section that said provisions requiring the collection of the gross receipts tax, the energy efficiency
Oh, that's right.
charge,
That's right. That's right.
and any other.
Okay.
And so I'll let Mike talk about the water use, section 286, but maybe since there's not a whole lot after that, maybe I'll just go through unless Mike, you need to go somewhere? Okay. So just a couple more sections, to the proposal of section 287. This was in the bill introduced, requirement for quarterly and annual reports, quarterly reports by the data center. Oh, I'm sorry, I jumped ahead. Yeah, so page 12. Everything before then where we left off is related to water.
Yep.
Mike, we'll go through that. So with respect to the reporting requirements, data center submits quarterly reports to the Department of Public Service. Specifically with respect to the data center's water and energy usage, including its peak usage per day. And then a proposal to strike the any interconnection requests that it may have submitted in other states. But also include in their quarterly report an itemization of the data center's payments towards shared infrastructure constructed to support the data center. So just keeping track of consumption, water and energy, and costs payment towards project infrastructure. And then the department, beginning on or before January 15th, 2028, and provided at least one data center has entered into a large load service equity contract under this subchapter, the Commissioner of Public Service. Do I need language? Service shall. Oh, no. So include in the department's existing annual report. This is the annual, I believe, the annual energy report, which is due on January 15th annually. Include in that report findings and recommendations related to the energy, environmental, and economic impacts of data center construction and operation in Vermont, as well as any impactful developments within the region, including any benefits to all ratepayers from electric infrastructure projects undertaken to provide power to one or more data centers. Section 288 proposals to strike this. This was just kind of a general provision. Looking at ways of maybe extracting from some of the revenue generated by the data centers to pay for other state policies and initiatives. The proposal is to strike that provision. The rulemaking section is not changed. Section 2, this is the Act 250 book, if you will. So the construction of improvements on a tract or tracts of land or a data center as defined in the subchapter we just went through would be subject to Act 250. All data centers that meet that permission.
So any data center of 20 megawatts and up, as we defined it way early on, would be subject to Act 250.
Yep. So it still applies to any data center not operational on or before the effective date of this act. Section 4 is a reporting requirement. This just is asking the PUC to do a written report on projected regional renewable electric generation market conditions. And in preparing that report, shall examine the cost and availability of new regional renewable electric generation resources during the years 2027 through 2035, including with respect to any changes in federal tax law, tax incentives, or tax credit availability, changes in federal permitting requirements or processes, federal trade policy, including tariffs or import restrictions affecting energy equipment or components, federal energy, environmental, or land use policies, supply chain constraints, interconnection timelines, and regional transmission development, and any other matters being relevant by the commission. So just keeping an eye on developments and availability of renewable energy over an extended period of time.
Can we go back to section 2 there? So the line 17, 10 VSA, all that stuff is the Act 250.
Oh, section 2. Okay, sorry. Yeah. Yeah.
That's the Act 250
Yes.
statute. So this is just dropping another
Yeah.
element to that statute.
It's adding into the definition of the word development.
Yeah, and Ellen can probably speak more specifically to that, but yeah, I think it's the definition of developments which are subject to Act 250. There's a whole list, so adding one more.
Right, okay.
Pretty narrow entrance to it.
So development is the list of things that require Act 250 review, and we're adding one more thing to that definition.
Okay.
And so, again, back to the report, this is just saying the commission shall provide an opportunity for written input, from various stakeholders that are referenced here and any other members of the public. Commission may consult with the Department of Public Service and other relevant state, regional, or federal entities as deemed appropriate. And this process is not subject to the contested case procedures under the Administrative Procedures Act, which is a formal process. It's just more open-ended review. And then the report comes to this committee and the Senate committees on finance and on natural resources. So those are the changes I was going to go through. Mike, I thought that water, but in the meantime, if there are more questions for me. Happy
I
to.
would just note that this section, I am very interested in, given what we are seeing, particularly because of data centers and other large loads doing to the markets.
This is just
A report.
session law, one-time report, right?
Yes, one time. And so that would, you would have that this year, December 15th. Great. Any other questions for me? Or you hear about the water summit?
Yeah.
Okay,
Thank you so much, Maria.
Maria.
you're welcome.
Wow.
And Mike, do you want me to just leave it up on my screen?
Or
Whatever.
whatever you.
I'm gonna stay, so I'll have
Yeah.
to.
Good afternoon, Mr. Micrograder, but Senate Council. I'm going to take you to page 9, section 286, and talk about water, where I go through the specific text. I want to talk a little bit about the concept of why this is being added and how it overlaps with Act 250 review. Because Act 250 review, when there is development and there's an application, the district commissions review multiple criteria. And some of those criteria, several of them apply to waters and use of waters, groundwater, et cetera. And there's also a provision in Act 250 that says when A&R issues permits for certain activities, those permits are rebuttably presumed to mean that the criteria for water has been met. But a district commission isn't always bound by those permits and can go beyond those permits or could not honor every provision in those permits. And so even though Act 250 is a comprehensive cumulative review of many issues, including environmental issues, the language here is being included to ensure that when there's a data center proposed for construction and operation, that certain aspects of water quality are addressed and managed according to however you want to manage them as the policymakers for the state. So with that said, I'm going to skip over the definition sections on page 9 and go to 10. We're going to come back to the definitions, but they only kind of make sense in the context of the substance. So on page 10, line 12, a person applying to operate a data center, and you already know what the definition is as Maria referenced. They shall identify to the commission, the PUC, and to the district commission, because this is going through Act 250, reviewing the data center's application, how the data center will cool the facility. Sure, you've heard about the need for cooling, about the energy use, how cooling is a necessary component of these data centers, and how water is potentially how they are cooled. But on page 10, line 16, if water is used to cool a data center, the data center shall use a closed loop cooling system to minimize impacts to the quality and quantity of surface water and groundwater, unless the district commission, the entity reviewing the Act 250 permit, determines that the use of the closed loop cooling system is not feasible at the proposed data center. Now let's go back to the definitions, because that's where closed loop cooling system is defined. Now, when I got this definition. I drafted this definition. I looked around at different states that have significant data centers. I landed on South Carolina, which apparently has several of them. And this definition is drawn from that South Carolina law, but with tweaks for Vermont. So a closed loop cooling system is a sealed cooling process in which the same water or coolant circulates continuously within the data center's cooling system without withdrawal of water from municipal public water supplies, groundwater, or surface water. All right, stop there. It's not getting its water from public. It's not getting it from groundwater. It's not getting it from surface water. It's got to bring that water in from somewhere else. It has to identify a source of its water. So it is not getting it from the traditional sources of water. And it cannot have a discharge of wastewater to municipal wastewater systems, groundwater, or surface water, except for de minimis discharges authorized under a discharge permit by A&R. A&R discharges all discharge of waste or pollutants into a surface water. And so if they're discharging this coolant, and even if it was just water, it will have been heated or cooled to a point that when it enters a surface water, it is technically a pollutant. So for example, Vermont Yankee, the cooling water there, when it was discharged into the Connecticut River, it needed a discharge permit because it effectively was an addition of heat into that water, which created issues with the water quality standards. So these systems, they're not supposed to be taking water from the traditional sources. They're not supposed to be discharging into groundwater or surface water unless for those de minimis discharges approved by A&R.
Sorry, withdrawal. Does that imply that need continuous withdrawal as opposed to initially charging a cooling system?
It's any effective withdrawal, and we'll get to that in a minute.
So I mean, I guess the question is whether somebody could interpret this as saying you have to truck in water to be able to.
So basically, you have to identify your source, and it can't come from a public water supply. It can't come from groundwater. It can't come from surface water. Where are you getting that water?
Yeah. Well, what I'm asking is the initial. Let's say there's a 1,000 gallon, 10,000 gallon loop for cooling the system, cooling the data center, and that water, that 10,000 gallons have to come from somewhere.
Right, and if it's feasible, it's not supposed to come from groundwater or surface water.
Okay. So this prohibition includes the initial charging of a cooling system. Okay, that's what I'm asking.
I have a question about the word person on line 12. That legally includes entities, companies. The definition of person in Title I, which is the statutory interpretation or statutory construction chapter, defines persons to include pretty much every entity that you can think of. So remember, the closed loop is subject to that determination of whether it's feasible. And if it's not feasible, then there might be a need for groundwater or surface water for cooling. So on page 11, line 1, if water is used or through a closed loop or through another type, the person applying has to identify the source and where it will be discharged. They also, if page 11, line 6, if the person that's going to run the data center is going to use groundwater, they have to get a groundwater withdrawal permit for any withdrawal of groundwater by the data center, notwithstanding the existing permitting threshold. So right now you only need a large volume groundwater withdrawal permit. If you are withdrawing 57,600 gallons a day, that might seem like a strange number, but that's 40 gallons a minute. So that's what triggers the groundwater withdrawal permit under existing law. But you are saying, regardless of that threshold, the data center has to get a groundwater withdrawal permit if it's using groundwater to cool its system. And similarly, well, actually, before I go on to the next subsection, page 11, line 11 through 12, right now, geothermal, closed loop, the standing column, heating pumps are exempt from a groundwater withdrawal permit. I added this language to say that for purposes of a data center, that exemption, it does not apply. That the data center cannot say, we don't need the groundwater withdrawal permit because we are a geothermal closed loop standing column heat pump. So moving on page 11, line 13, the person's operating a data center and they're going to use surface water to cool the facility. They have to get a surface water withdrawal permit underneath 10 VSA 1043. You should know that that permit is not available yet. That permit is supposed to be available July 1, 2026, but ANR has indicated that they won't even go to the rulemaking for that permit until the end of the late fall, early winter is when they estimate going to rulemaking. So this permit won't be available most likely until 2027. So if a data center is going to use surface water, it's going to have to wait until 2027 to get that permit.
That was the bill we passed.
A couple of years ago.
Yeah. So has to be a closed loop unless
Not
closed loop isn't
feasible,
feasible.
right?
If not feasible, then you need to get a permit
If
if
it's
you want to use
groundwater,
groundwater or
Sure.
permit if you want to use soak.
Well, even for a closed loop system, that any withdrawal of water.
Or really, it's any discharge that in the closed loop system, because remember, you're saying it can't come from any of the traditional withdrawal sources. So they're going to have to identify, maybe they bring in a coolant, probably what they're going to do for a closed loop system. And they use that coolant, but that coolant, these systems have leakage, they have discharge. And so they're going to need a permit for that discharge. Now, they're going to need to get every other potential applicable water quality permit too. And that is a pretty significant list. So you will see on page 11, line 18 to 21, they're going to need a state stormwater operating permit because stormwater will be coming off of that facility. They'll probably need what's called a standard industrial classification stormwater permit, which is a federal permit for certain industries, so that certain industries put up stormwater management specific to their industry. They're going to need, if they're located in a lake shoreland, they're going to need a shoreland permit. If they're located within a river corridor, they're going to need a river corridor permit. Those permits aren't available yet either. So they are going to be 2028 underneath 8632. So if they're going to locate in a river corridor, they won't be able to get that permit until 2028. And if they're going to alter the stream in any way, move 10 cubic yards of in-stream material, they're going to need a stream off permit. If they're going to be located in a wetland or a wetland buffer, they're going to need a wetland permit. And so this is basically what a large-scale development needs to analyze before building on a site, what they need. And so they're going to need everything that any other development needs, if applicable.
That's up.
A minute or so ago, you mentioned about bringing a coolant in the closed system. I'm assuming that's adding into existing water, or is it separate from the use of water?
I am not the expert on that. I tried to figure out if coolant is they're just using the coolant. And when I look at the different definitions and the different specs on these, I could argue it either way.
So with that being said, will water discharge permits take into account whatever's added into water?
Yes.
Possibly? Okay.
Yes. So the discharge permit will be specific to the pollutant in the effluent. So, and there's many different things that could happen. So if it's a toxic chemical enough, that would violate water quality standards for that chemical, there's something called the QBELs, the water quality based effluent limitations. And there are specific things that you need to do in order to get to that QBEL and to get to that effluent limitation. And so it all depends on what your discharge. If it's heat, they'll probably require you to basically have a system where it's stored until it gets to a point where it's no longer of a temperature that it's going to cause harm and it's discharged into the water.
Thank you.
So we're moving on to page 12, line
Sorry.
1.
So what would happen in the case of they decided to build a cistern? Collect water, go natural.
Ooh, a cistern? Thought about that. Yeah, that's technically your water. And you would still need that discharge permit, but you could use that water because that's technically yours. That's a good question.
It'd be a big cistern.
Well, I know.
You could need a big cistern, but still.
Was the comment not made last time we reviewed this that 80% of the water evaporated in these systems because there was a significant amount of evaporation?
That was what I think without a closed loop system, right? The closed loop system had significantly less evaporation.
That's the point.
But if you did have evaporation, you might need an air pollution controller because of the steam that potentially might discharge. On page 12, line 1 through 4, this is novel, this requirement, and I'll have to go into a little bit of detail why it's novel. So under the Federal Clean Water Act, if you require a federal permit for a discharge in a state, you have to go to the state and have the state certified to the federal entity issuing the permit that your activity is going to meet state water quality standards. So if you're a dam and you need a FERC license, you have to go to A&R to get a certification that that dam and its activity is going to meet the state's water quality certification standards. And then you have to give that certification to FERC. If you need to disrupt a federal wetland, you need to do the same thing. You have to go to A&R and get that certification that you meet the state's water quality standards, and you give that to the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. This is saying that for a data center, the data center, which is a state permit, and from what I know, doesn't require a federal permit, that state permitted facility is going to need a certification similar to the federal 401 water quality certification. And that is not currently done in Vermont for any state permit. And why would you do this? Well, a 401 cert requires more comprehensive analysis than just every individual permit that you may require. Remember that list of permits that I've listed? This is about the whole effect of a proposed activity on a water through its discharge. There's typically studies are required about the effect of the activity on the aquatic biota, the aquatic habitat. Basically its uses for irrigation, recreation, or otherwise. And so you will be overlaying that federal analysis on this state permit, which would be the first time that you have done that for a state permit. And you should know that a water quality certification under federal law, the agency has up to a year to issue it, but it often takes longer if they're diligently pursuing the issuance of the certification. So this adds more comprehensive review. It adds the ability to ask questions like, how is this going to affect the wetlands? How is this going to affect animals or aquatic biota? How is this going to affect PFAS discharge? It allows for that more comprehensive review, but it is an overlay and it is partly duplicative of some of the other permits that are issued.
What types of projects need to get those types of permits now?
So anything that needs a federal permit that's going to have a discharge to the state's waters. So typically, when you look at the A&R list of 401 certs, it's for dams and it's for disturbance of federal wetlands. And so those are, but it could be, hold on. That's pretty much it. Some stormwater permits, some nuclear regulatory commission permits, which I don't think we have anymore. But those are it.
Yes, thank you.
So page 12, line 1 through 4, a person applying to operate a data center has to get a water quality certificate from A&R that meets the same criteria that A&R requires to be met to obtain a Federal Clean Water Act, Section 401. And then last page 12, I think most, if not all of you know what PFAS are. They're often referred to as the forever chemical. And let's go back and look at the definition section again, specifically on page 10. This is the US EPA definition of what PFAS is. And this is based on the specific, one of 3 specific chemical structures of a chemical. This is different from how some Vermont programs define PFAS. Some Vermont programs define PFAS as any chemical with a fluorinated compound, or just maybe just a fluorinated compound. And that's a significant difference, because if underneath that fluorinated compound definition, there's 15,000 chemicals that meet that definition. Underneath the US EPA's definition, there are substantially fewer that meet that definition. And why is that an issue? Because on page 12, lines 5 through 8, the language would require a person applying to operate a data center who intends to discharge wastewater to submit a plan to A&R establishing a program that monitors the discharge for the presence of PFAS. So if you have the definition that's 15,000 chemicals, they're going to need a plan to monitor for 15,000 chemicals. If you have the EPA definition, EPA has an assessment method for for monitoring PFAS under its definition. They already have that assessment method. It only measures for 40, but it's there. And this is a policy decision for you. Because some of the advocates will say for the 15,000, they can test for any fluorine or fluorinated aspect that's going into water. And that's true, but that's not going to tell you the specific chemical that's being discharged. That's just going to tell you that there's fluorine or fluorination in the water. When you do it with the EPA assessment method, you are specifically monitoring for 40 PFAS. That's your choice. Right now, it's at the 40 because honestly, I think I pushed for it in the discussions with the advocates and the co-chair. And so, but that's your choice. I'm just putting that on the table.
Yeah, Brett Stafford.
So based on that, you would say that the federal guidelines are more encompassing and capture more than the individual testing of the 15,000, or just opposite?
I think it's the opposite. I think the EPA assessment for the 40 that they monitor, it actually specifically has testing for those 40 specific chemicals. For the 15,000, it's just as generalized if there's a presence of a fluorine or fluorinated compound in the water. It won't tell you what the specific chemical is.
So the federal guidelines pick up the absolute PFAS that are there.
It's those 40.
Okay.
So there could be others. Remember, there's 15,000 of them according to some people's definition. And so, and this isn't, you're not the first entity to debate this question. It's been debated by your other committees, health and welfare. It's been debated at the federal level. It's debated in agriculture about whether or not there's PFAS and pesticides. Well, it depends on how you define PFAS. And so it's a policy decision.
So did you your hand up? No. So, I mean, my general feeling just from bills we voted on the floor or bills that I've followed, I mean, even going all the way back to lead, is that the EPA standards are generally less stringent, and I feel like right now are unreliable. So I don't know what the EPA standards are going to be tomorrow. And so wouldn't you, if we're basing our decisions on the EPA standards, that feels like shaky ground to me.
I mean, I think your point is valid in some respects, but also recently has been addressed in other respects. It's valid in the respect that there is no PFAS standard for surface water right now. There is no discharge standard. There's no QVAL. There's no effluent limitation right now. Because they can't really figure it out. There's pre-treatment where you try to filter it out, and then you have to deal with that filtrated liquid. But you are correct that right now, under both EPA and under the state standard, there's no surface water. The state and EPA just adopted a pretty strict standard for PFAS for drinking water. It's now 5 nanograms per liter or whatever the metric they're using is, which is, and they just confirmed that they're not going to change that. So to an extent, that EPA standard, when it was adopted, it was stricter than Vermont's. So that's going to stay in place, and it's pretty protected at both the federal and the state level. But you're Right, the PFAS for surface water. There is no surface water standard.
I do have a question now. So comparing the two methods, so this is requiring monitoring. And so,
I think it's gonna come down to what A&R approves as monitoring. Like, if they can approve a method that monitors the broader definition. That's provides surety about what it's monitoring. And I don't know the answer to that. So this would only apply if they're using a coolant that contains PFAS. That's a good question. Maybe, maybe not. Because if you're using certain kinds of piping, it's gonna likely have PFAS in it. And then whether or not that's leaching into whatever is discharged. And there's the question if this PFAS arrived in your equipment to begin with.
Or the initial water you got.
Potentially in initial water. So it's everywhere. It's in you, it's in me, it's everywhere.
if I'm not mistaken, I think Sarah Hedi is going to talk to you around the company. Opinions on this.
I'm going to House Environment to talk about this now, if that's what.
That's what I just said,
Yeah.
yeah.
Well, I would definitely appreciate their, and we're definitely out of our wheelhouse here, so I would appreciate their feedback. I'm just, I'm worried about relying on EPA standards.
So one requires monitoring 40 specific chemicals.
And that's if you use their the EPA's assessment.
That's right.
That-
If you are discharging into the surface waters. The other requires monitoring of 14,000.
But you
No, it's
can't,
not even, you're not monitoring the specific, you're just monitoring
That's for,
to see if there's any presence. And so
for-
what is the usefulness of the information that is being monitored there? Is either more useful than the other?
well, if you know what's being discharged, you can come up with certain methods for
Mitigations.
trying to control it. If you don't know the specifics, basically you have to implement more broader blunt force controls that might have more consequences than just on the discharge.
or further testing,
Or you could do further testing, yeah.
like more specific. That's what I'm wondering, like for testing for 10,000 compounds with this high level test, and it
You could
comes up
then,
positive, would you
right.
want to do then more specific testing?
you could say, all right, well, let's reverse engineer this to an extent, like what could be contributing PFAS or fluorinated compounds to this water. Oh, we think it's this or this. We should test these specific compounds using this method. I think you could do that. But again, that's what A&R is going to require. And this is just requires a monitoring plan be submitted to A&R for approval. Now, what they submit really depends on what the universe it is that they're testing for. But then it'll be up to A&R to require or approve what the monitoring will be.
I think we'll let environment know that we have a specific dilemma around this section. Is that the bill? Yes. Wow. Okay, so, yeah, thank you so much.
It's
Um,
being Water vapor emissions. Something about us.
Okay,
Going to cover-
great. Is it right into that? Go.
Leave the door open.
Right. Evaporation probably wouldn't, but if it would.
Leave the door open.
Okay, we'll text. Okay. Do you think folks feel like we could take a 5-minute break and actually be back in 5 minutes? I can. Okay, let's go off.